you. And I hope you heard what Jerome was singing, because that's what this service is all about. Making sure you know that all you need to believe in is you. So today, I'm going to talk about your calling. Now, there was this king who was very greedy. He thought everything belonged to him. There should be no other king. So whenever he heard there was another king, he would go and intimidate and bully them until they gave up their throne. You know, the physical throne. Now, this king lived in a beautiful glass castle. And so he would go around the kingdom collecting all these thrones. He was the baddest king in the world. He was the best. He had the most. And then all of a sudden, everything, including the house, came crashing down from the weight of all those thrones. Now, you know the moral to that story. He who lives in a glass house shouldn't stow thrones. So this is the white stone ceremony. And I want to encourage you not to stow your thrones or throw your stones. It's important. So I'm going to talk to you about the origin of this ceremony and get a little bit into more about our calling. About 23 years ago, I wrote this play for a school in Kansas City that needed a speaker the next day for Black History Month. And in my work, in my career, I was a public affairs director, so I would do things with the community and with schools. So this particular school really needed an inspirational speaker, and I had this idea, this dream, that I would tell this story about a famous African-American woman who many people never heard of, and I didn't hear of until I got into my career in aviation. And this woman's name is Bessie Coleman. And I had the opportunity to stand in for her posthumous induction into the Women in Aviation International Hall of Fame back in 1995. That gave me the idea. So few people, I grew up in Kansas, so I knew all about Amelia Earhart, but never heard of Bessie Coleman. And her story is so powerful. I mean, it's packed with unity principles, though she never heard of unity, I'm sure. So I was telling a friend about this story that I was going to do, and then after the story caught on, I was telling the friend, people were starting to call me and say, can you come and do the play for my school, for my church, for my this, for my that? And my friend said, you know, you really missed your calling. And I had to think about that for a minute. Did I miss my calling? Sometimes we think that you have to get a calling by a certain age, right? If you're not called to do something in your teens or your 20s or after college or whatever, then it's too late. But I want to tell you, it's never too late to follow your calling. There are people who followed their callings to graduate from college in their 80s. We read these stories all the time. 90 years old, getting a master's degree, learning to fly, ski, canoe. Age has no limit to your calling. When you get the calling, you need to act on it. And so I shared that story with you personally to show you how important it is to not listen to what other people say about your calling, because it's your calling. Now, when Duke first invited me to consider the ministry here was long before I even started in ministerial school. He saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And the day that he called me to ask me, my job was going away. The federal government we were downsizing in my department, and my whole staff was going to be eliminated. And he knew that. And he offered me an opportunity to serve on this platform with him way back in 1995. And I just wasn't quite ready. I had only been in ministerial school for a short time. I was only going 1 week out of the year of my vacation time, so I was on the slow track to ministerial school. And I just wasn't ready. But when Duke called and asked me, take your time, think about it, and when I finally got ready to give him the answer, I was a little embarrassed to say, I don't think I'm ready. So I said to him, there's a song I learned when I was growing up at Calvary Baptist Church. And it's, when he calls me, I will answer. I'll be somewhere listening for my name. Thank you. Don't we have wonderful musicians? Thank you. So the point is, you may not be ready at the time when you get the call the first time, but when that call comes the second time, you need to be ready to answer. And so I was. And that's how that happened. It took me a few more years to finish my career and finish ministerial school. But it can be done. Whatever your calling is, it's never too late to start. So when we think about calling, let's think about Revelations 2:17, the book of Revelations. I put it on the front of your bulletin. It says, "Let anyone who has an ear listen. To everyone who overcomes, I give some hidden manna. And I will give a white stone, and on the white stone is written a new name that no one knows except the one who receives it." Now, my new name eventually became Reverend. But we are all known by many names throughout our childhood, throughout our adulthood. I remember a distant cousin, a little boy, talking to us about he was always getting in trouble. He couldn't have been more than 4 or 5, and he was telling my sister his story about how much trouble he was getting into with his grandpa, always mischievous. And she was saying to him something about his name, and he said, "Well, I know my middle name is Dad Blame It. Dad Blame It, stop that. Dad Blame It, put that down. Dad Blame It, sit down." And so he really thought that his middle name was Dad Blame It. So, we're all called by many things. This scripture tells us about our calling. It says, "For those who have an ear to listen." Now, we're not talking about the physical ear. We're talking about the spiritual ear. That ear that you listen to when no one else is around, when you're by yourself, and you may be having a dark night of the soul, and you finally get quiet, and you hear a voice calling your name. It doesn't happen overnight. It may take a while. You may have to go through some things before you find that voice that's been calling you all along, but your busy mind was so loud you couldn't hear the inner voice speaking your name, calling out who you are called here to be. We all have a purpose. Mark Twain said, "The most important days of your life are the day you're born and the day you find out why." And he found out why working in Hannibal, Missouri, near the river. His name was Samuel Clemens, and he was called to be Mark Twain. Mark Twain is a measure of the depth of the river. So after a certain 2 fathoms or 1,200 feet or however many, they'll call out Mark Twain. And Mark Twain was also the name of a writer whom Samuel Clemens happened to like. So he took on the name. He had a new calling. His calling was to be a writer, not just to work on the riverboat, but to be a famous writer. And he became that, calling himself Mark Twain. So he got a calling. He got a calling. He listened to that still small voice within himself say, "You are more than Samuel Clemens. You are Mark Twain. You are a famous writer." That listening takes place when we go into meditation. That's when we hear that small voice speaking something that only we can hear. Now that's one of the actions of the scripture. There are 2 actions and 3 promises in the scripture. The second action is overcomes. You have to overcome your past. You know what you wrote down during the burning bowl ceremony? You can't just write it down and burn it and it's gone away. You got to overcome. You got to rise above whatever challenges you're facing in your life. That's the other action. You got to listen to the Spirit within, and then you got to rise above whatever obstacles are standing in your way from your calling. See, there's always a reason we can't do something, can't be something. Maybe what someone used to say about us, "You'll never amount to anything. You'll never be this. You can't be that. You're too this, you're too that. You're not enough of this, you're not enough of that." We have to rise above those ideas that hold us back from who we are called to be. You're called to be much greater than you even think you are. That's your calling. There's a young man who listened to this voice. You've probably heard of Scott Harrison. Scott Harrison was a promoter, a nightclub promoter, made a lot of money. He started out with a band, and the band went belly up. He was in New York, and he found out you could drink and make money drinking. And he was young, in his 20s. He got into all these different nightclubs and helping other people buy more drinks, and he would drink more, and next thing you know, he's a promoter for all these nightclubs, making a lot of money, having these lavish parties, drugged out, drunk out, didn't even know what day it was many times. And one day he had a dark night of the soul, and something said to Scott, you know, this is not your path. There's something wrong with what you're doing here. You're destructive. You're hurting yourself. There's something bigger for you. There's a calling for you. And somehow he got on this 2-year journey on a ship off the coast of Liberia. It was a hospital ship. And during that process, he noticed that the people they were treating were drinking water that had worms and bugs in it. Children were dying in their infancy from drinking this terrible water. That's all they had. And the light came on. Spirit spoke to him and said, there's a higher calling for you. He started what's called charity water. And they're working to provide clean water to the more than 663 million people in the world who don't have access to it. And he didn't want to start a charity where most of the costs went for administrative and overhead costs. He wanted a charity where almost all of the costs would go to help the people. So he reached out to his wealthy friends from his old life. And he was surprised at how quickly people caught on, how they got the call to join in with him and donate their monies and their time. They had concerts. And instead of birthday parties, they would donate money in lieu of a birthday party. So instead of giving somebody a cake or a gift or money for their birthday, they'd send the money to charity water. It is a phenomenal charity because this young man listened to the still small voice within him, calling him to be higher, to come up higher, to do more. Dr. Martin Luther King, who we will celebrate tomorrow, and will be celebrated all over the world as a day on, not a day off, said the most important question you will ever ask yourself is, what am I doing for others? What am I doing for others? Now that's a calling for every one of us here and all of you watching on live stream to ask yourself, what am I doing for others? And if what you're doing is not serving someone else, then you haven't gotten your calling, your true calling. So the two actions in this scripture are to listen. Listen to that still small voice that only you can hear when you're in your quiet moments, when you sit in the stillness. When you've asked and asked and asked questions and still don't have an answer, go within, because your heart has the answer. Scripture says, out of the mouth the heart speaks, and that is the truth. Your mouth can say all kinds of things, but if it's not coming from your heart, it is meaningless. The second action in this scripture is overcome. Let go of whatever may have been and what might have been, what could have been. Let go of the past. Just as we did the burning bowl, don't do it just one time. Have your own burning bowl every day, because there's always something we need to let go of so that we can overcome and rise above and follow our true calling. Now, the rest of that scripture contains 3 promises, and I want you to really pay attention to these 3 promises. The first problem is hidden manna. Let anyone who has an ear listen, not hear, but hear. Listen. To everyone who overcomes, who rises above their obstacles, their past, anything that stands in their way, I will give some of the hidden manna. Now, some is the operative word, because we can be very greedy, can't we? I was telling the Bible class this morning, one of my guilty pleasures is barbecue potato chips. And I am not satisfied until I have eaten the whole bag. And it doesn't matter if it's a little bag or a big bag. I am not satisfied till the last chip is gone. And then I want some more. And I'm a barbecue potato chip connoisseur. Anybody who knows me personally, especially my family, if we travel somewhere and I know they got a brand of barbecue potato chips I have never had, I'm going to buy those potato chips. Whether I'm at the airport, at a hotel, or a quick trip, if there's a potato chip, a barbecue potato chip that I haven't had, I must taste it. And I will tell you whether or not it is a good chip. And that is the only time that I know I can only eat just one, because if it's not a good barbecue chip, I'm not eating the whole bag. The hidden, I got a buddy here. I grew up on Guy's barbecue potato chips. I got hooked on them as a child when my father would come home with his black lunchbox from General Motors, and he'd stop at the watering hole, if you know what I mean, to fill up, and I'm not talking about his car, and when he would come home, he would have his lunchbox full of the things I liked. The barbecue potato chips, the cinnamon hot balls, the Hostess Twinkies, the Hostess cupcakes, anything I liked. And he would wake me up, even on a school night, to enjoy my delicacies. And mostly, the first thing I would eat would be the barbecue potato chips. So I got hooked at a very early age. However, that greed part, where you can't get enough, that's what it's talking about when it says, I will give you some of the hidden manna. And manna is not the food that we're talking about, the chips. It's that spiritual nourishment that we all are seeking. It's not food that we're after. It's spiritual nourishment, being all that we can be, knowing we are here and called to be a certain thing, and we're following our calling. That's why we come here. We're all seeking the truth for ourselves, and that's what manna is. Well, see, back in the Old Testament, we read that the children of Israel wandering around the desert with Moses for 40 years, and they were hungry, and they were complaining, and they were murmuring, and finally God does send them some of the hidden manna. Now, they could only have what they could use. They would have to go out and get it, but if they tried to hoard it, it would spoil. And every day they would get exactly what they could use. Do you know we have everything we need? We may not have everything we want, but we have everything we need. It's the wants that get in our way. It's the wants that hold us back. It's the wants that keep us believing that we are not enough. So the first promise is this hidden manna. It's all available to you. It's at your access, at your disposal all the time. Whatever you're seeking is already seeking you. The second promise in this scripture is the white stone. And in a few moments, we're going to do our white stone ceremony. For all those who listen to the Spirit within and overcome and let go of the past things and be here now in this present moment, knowing that you are enough, I will give you some enough for your needs of spiritual nourishment. And then I will give you a white stone. Now, the white stone comes from back in the days when in the Roman Empire, when prisoners were released, they were given a stone to symbolize a new slate, a new leaf, freedom from any past indiscretions, freedom from whatever caused them to be incarcerated in the first place. They were a new being, a new creature. They didn't have to worry about having a stigma against them because they had been in prison. They were free. So that's where that comes from. We're as free as we make up our minds to be, because we can be prisoners in our own minds. And then the third promise is a new name that no one but you will know. And when Scott Harrison started Charity Water, he had been given a new name, a new purpose. And that's what the white stone ceremony is about. So I invite you now to think about your calling. Why are you here? What are you called to be? What gifts do you bring to the world? What have you been holding back? Trying not to be too big, too important, too smart. What is it that you know is your calling in this lifetime? Now, sometimes we get that immediately. My name, Sandra, comes from the Greek name Alexander, which means helper of mankind. And I didn't know that, but I've been doing that since I was a little girl. I've been doing my calling even as a child, helping neighbors, helping friends, classmates. Anytime I saw somebody needing help, if it was in my capability, I would lend a hand. But I didn't know I was living my purpose, my calling, my name, until I became an adult. So during this ceremony, I'm going to have you ask yourself some questions, 2 questions, and you'll see them at the bottom of the bulletin. So this is going to be asking your heart, your true self. What am I called to be right now and in the coming year? And as I let go of the old beliefs and old habits and error thinking that's been holding me back, what am I called to be known as? What is my calling? What is my new name? Think about that as we move into meditation.